In this lab, we're going to learn how to use encryption with our database server. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is, hopefully you've already finished the first part of project 2. So now we're going to move on to the second part. Here's my IP address for my server. So I'm going to copy that into my clipboard and I'm going to SSH into my server. So I'm going to use my student account. All right, I'm in. Just going to make my font a little bit bigger for you so it's easier to see. So first thing I'm going to do is, as I usually do, I'm going to get in as root, and we're going to log into our SQL server. Okay, so I'm in SQL. So first thing I'm going to do is check to see how I'm connected. As you can see, I am not using encryption right now. So this line right here where it says SSL, it says not in use. And we can also show the variables on the server. Now there's a lot of variables, right? So if I just show variables, a whole bunch of stuff comes up. So we're going to add the like clause to this so that we can only see stuff related to SSL. So I'm just going to put %SSL%, right? It works very similar to a SQL statement. So you can see that I do not have OpenSSL in use on my server, and it is disabled right now. So have SSL is disabled, and all my certificate paths are empty, so there's nothing for it to do with encryption. So encryption is completely disabled on the server. So let's fix that. So in order to fix that, my first step is, well, actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize this window just a little bit for you because I know some students tell me that it cuts off the window at the bottom sometimes. So let's do this. There we go. Okay, just so you can see my commands. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get into my configuration files for my server. So from here, I've got a couple files in here. I'm going to create a new folder called SSL. And that's where I'm going to store all of my SSL stuff. So now that I'm in that folder, my first step is I have to generate some keys, and we're going to use the OpenSSL library to do that. Almost every Linux system has OpenSSL already installed. So the first command is we have to generate our RSA keys. We're going to use 2048. All right, so I'm going to create a file called ca-key.pem, and this is going to be my my RSA key for my certificate authority. I think if you've taken a security class, you've probably learned a little bit about certificates and encryption, and you should have learned that you have to have a certificate authority, and then you have certificates, and you have private and public keys. And that's sort of what we're doing here. We're using RSA to create a certificate request. Now, in the real world, you could have a certificate authority signing these certificate requests for you, rather than doing them on your own. So these are going to be self-signed certificates the way we do this in this lab. All right, so we just generated the file. Now I'm going to generate a request. Now again, I'm running as root here, so if you're not running as root, a lot of this stuff will not work. You'll have to prefix it with the sudo command. So you certainly could do that. You could use the sudo command, but I just prefer to do it this way. It just saves me a little bit of typing. And I'm just going to use 365,000 days, which I think is the maximum you can set it to, which is effectively forever, at least for the purposes of this lab, right? So my out file is going to be, my key file rather is going to be ca-key, which we generated in the previous step. And then I use -out, and it did a line feed there, so you have to look on the next line. So we're going to generate a file called ca-cert.pem. Now we have to fill out a little bit of information. So I'm in the United States. I happen to be in New Jersey. Having a hard time typing today. And this is going to be our, I'm just going to put my MariaDB here. Doesn't really matter too much what you put there. All right, so that generated my file. So if I do the ls command, I can see I've got my two files. I've got my certificate and my private key. So now we are going to use those to generate our keys for our client and our server. So both the server and the client are going to need a set of keys. Each one of them is going to need the certificate for this, the RSA certificate that we just created, and their own private key and public key. So let's give this a shot. So first step is I'm going to create, just to keep things organized, I'm going to create a server directory, and this is where I'm going to keep my server certificates. And I'm going to go into that directory just so I can run the commands from in there. So again, we're going to use the OpenSSL to generate a request, the OpenSSL command rather to generate a request. We're going to try to request a new key. We're going to use RSA 2048, just like we did with the server key. And again, the number of days, I just use the max. All right. Dash nodes. What else do we need? The key out file. So this is going to be the name of the file that we output. So it's going to be server-key.pem. You could use something else if you like, but I'm just trying to keep it simple. And then we're also going to output the request. All right, so let's go ahead and try this. Again, we have to fill out our little form. And really, you could just make this stuff up. That's kind of what I'm doing. You don't have to put a challenge password or an optional company name. Okay, so now that that's done, we're going to use the OpenSSL command again. And we're going to use RSA to generate our keys. Or actually, we're just going to process our key here. All right, so, and really it's the same name. A lot of times, you would use two different names. You would generate a request with one file and a key with the other file name, but this should work fine. Okay, so now our server-key is the actual private key, and now we have to generate the key pair. So we're going to use OpenSSL X509, and this is going to use the certificate from our server, right? So now we're going to use that. We're going to have that certificate authority sign our keys so that we can actually use them. All right, so we have our request file. Now I'm putting forward slash in front of this because my my certificate is in the root of this directory. It's one directory up. And again, I'm going to do the same thing here. So that's the path to my certificate and to my key, which we're going to use to sign this key pair. We're going to set the serial to 01. It's the first one we're creating. And then my out file is going to be server-cert.pem. So it's going to take that server pem key, or the request rather, and it's going to create the signed certificate. So right now it's an unsigned certificate, so it's going to create a signed certificate from that. Hopefully this works. And it worked, right? So it output that for us. So now we have, if I look in this directory, I have my certificate, I have my private key, and then I have the the request file, which we use to generate that certificate with the private key. So I should be able to use that certificate and private key on my, now remember the certificate is really the public key, the server key is really the private key, and those are going to be in the configuration for my server. And that's going to help us, that's going to allow the server to do encryption. So the next step is we have to do this for the client. And my internet connection just disconnected, so I'm going to pause the video while I reconnect myself again. All right, I'm back connected right where I was before. So I've got my three files here. The two that I need, the only two I need for my configuration are going to be a certificate and the key, the private key and the public key. And then the third that I need is the CA certificate, which is in the root of this directory. So if I look in the root of this directory, there I have my CA-cert, which I'm also going to need. Obviously, the private key I'm not going to give to anyone, right? All right, so my next step is I have to do the same thing for my client. So I think I made a client directory. I did not, so let me make a client directory. And again, you don't have to do this step where you make these directories. but I just think it's a little bit easier to keep things organized. All right, so now that I'm in the client directory, I've got nothing in here yet, so I'm going to run those exact same commands that you saw me run before, but instead of typing them, I copied them down because I just had to change them to work with the client. So US, New Jersey, and this is going to be the Maria DB client. And again, I don't have to put anything in for the password. All right, so now just as before, I have to use the, oops, I didn't mean to paste this in twice. Sorry. So just as before, I have to use RSA to create the key file, which it does. So I wrote out the RSA key. And exactly like before, I'm going to have to use my server's certificate, right? That certificate authority that I created to sign my private key and my public key. So that's going to happen with this command. And again, I'm using .. just like I did previously so that it's going up a directory to get those certificate files. All right, so that worked. So now I'm going to change directory back into my SSL directory, so I can verify that this all worked. Right? I can't use these files unless they work, and MariaDB really doesn't have good login to tell you why SSL doesn't work. So it's a good idea to verify this. So there's a command in OpenSSL that will verify. So it basically makes sure that if somebody's using the OpenSSL library, that it's going to work, and really any other library for SSL, it should work the same way. So ca-cert.pem. So I'm going to use my certificate authority certificate to check my server's certificate. Oops. And then I'm also going to check my client. So I'm going to make sure both the client and the server have valid certificates. Whoops, I got an error. Let's see what this error is. No such file or directory. Oh, it's I forgot to prefix client with my path. There we go. So both of those files check out okay. So it took the certificate authority and it made sure that both of those certificates, the server certificate and the client certificate, would both validate, basically. So I'm going to need 3 files on each side of my connection. I'm going to need on the both of them have to know who the certificate authority is. So that's going to be ca-cert. So that tells them who is the certificate authority. Which in this case it's self-signed, right? So I generated those, but theoretically we could have used a different authority to sign those certificates. Then they're each going to need their public key and private key. When they try to connect to each other, they're going to exchange their public keys, right? And they're going to use their private keys to decrypt that traffic, which is the key files. So that a cert file they exchange. Now, not only do they exchange their cert files, but when they exchange the cert files, they're going to get validated against that CA, that certificate authority that we created. The idea being that, it's you can't create that trusted connection. You can't create that encrypted connection between the two nodes unless they both know that that their certificates were issued by a trusted authority, right? Of course, in this case, it's just us that are trusting it, but in the real world, that's how encryption works. I don't want to explain everything about encryption here because hopefully you've learned about this in other classes and this is familiar to you, and you understand the concept of these certificates and so forth. Really, what we're just doing here is trying to apply, what you've probably learned in other classes to use this with MariaDB, right? To create a encrypted connection between your server and your client. So let's give this a try. So now we have to change the configuration. And if you recall, we did this before in our other lab, and mariadb.conf.d is our server configuration. So let's go in there first. So, and I'll tell you what, we're just going to take a look at what's in there. Right, so if you remember, we're going to have to use 50-server.cnf. So I'm going to use VI to edit that file. Okay, so I'm inside that file, and I got to scroll down a little bit. There's going to be a section in here for security, and it's all going to be hashed out. There it is. So you can see that this is all hashed out, right? Because we're not using it right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment those three. I just hit the X key to uncomment those. X just deletes whatever's under that line. And then I can go to insert mode to edit these. And of course, this is not going to be the right path. So I have to delete these. Although those I gave the same name, server-cert and key.cert. So let me switch to insert mode. So if you remember, we put it, the SSL CA is going to be in /etc. Whoops, so oh wait, we're already in etc. Etc MySQL SSL, and then I called it CA-cert. And then likewise for my server, it's going to be in server/server-cert. And then my key is also in server/server.cert inside etc MySQL. That should be all I need, right? So once I generate these, and I just noticed there's a little line in here. It says for generating SSL certificates, you can use the example GUI2 tinyCA. Never used that. Maybe that'd be kind of fun to try that. Maybe it's a little bit easier than using these commands in OpenSSL. But I can tell you for sure, OpenSSL is in almost every distro of Linux, so you always have OpenSSL available to you, or it might be difficult to use those command line utilities. So I quit, saved my changes. I'm going to go back. I'm going to restart MariaDB. All right, MariaDB has been restarted. And now I'm going to take a look at my configuration in MariaDB. We're just going to make sure that it's running with SSL now. Okay, so I'm in with MySQL. Let me do show variables like OpenSSL. And it still says disabled for have SSL, which means, so it read in the files, right? Etc MySQL SSL CA-cert, and then server-cert and server-key. I know those files are there. I saw them, right? So I think what the problem here is, and you're going to experience the same thing, is that in order for MySQL to use those files, it has to have access to them. We created them as root, and we did all this as root, which means that no one else really has access to those files. So this is not a Linux class, so I don't want to explain how this works. But we need to change the ownership of the files to the MySQL user, and we're also going to just set the permissions to everyone being able to read, write, and execute. In the real world, we wouldn't do that. We would probably be more granular, with how we set the permissions. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of explaining how permissions work in Linux. So we'll just do it overall. We'll just make it wide open. We don't really care. It's just a test server. So I'm gonna change the ownership to MySQL for everything in etc /MySQL SSL, and then I'm also going to change the permissions. And then we're going to do the same thing with everything in client and everything in server. All right, so now MySQL should own all the files, and it should have access to read, write, and execute all those files. We're going to restart the MySQL server. I'm sorry, the MariaDB server, not MySQL. I keep getting them mixed up. Now we can reconnect and see what happened. All right, so it's still disabled, meaning we still are missing something, right? So have SSL is disabled. We don't really care about have OpenSSL. That just means whether or not it's using OpenSSL or some other, in this case, it's using YaSSL version 2.44. But I'm going to double check these file names just to make sure that they're correct. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of debugging, which we're going to cover a little bit more detail later in the course. But I wanted to look in the error log. So you can see my path here. I'll show you. So I'm in var log MySQL. So inside var log MySQL is where we get our log files. You can see here I've got an error log. And if we use the tail command to look at error log, you can see here I've got a warning, SSL error, unable to get certificate. So it's telling me that for some reason it's not able to get that certificate file, and that's why it's not enabling our profile. So let me go and look and see if there's anything wrong with that path. And if you recall, I looked at that path a few minutes ago, and I'm just going to show you. I'm going to copy it here for you. So and you know what? I just saw the problem. So let me show you what I did wrong here, just so you can see. You know what? I'm going to copy and paste this for you so you can see it in the screen. So this is a Notepad++. So take a look. It's always something very subtle, right? Notice my SSL CA path is ca-cert.pem, right? And here's the full path, etc MySQL SSL. But here I forgot the SSL. So it's MySQL /SSL and then server-cert. Same with here. So these two paths are wrong, and that's probably why it's failing. So let's fix those and see if we can get this to work. So I'm just going to go back into my, let's see, I could have just done this directly, but just showing you as I go out of all those files. Now I'm going to go back down into etc MySQL, right? And then I'm going to go into MariaDB config. Then I'm going to go to 50server.cnf. And you'll notice, so I've got my SSL. So SSL just turns on SSL. If you don't have that in your file, you should put it there. I don't know if it's required or not in the newer version of MariaDB, but in MySQL, you always had to put that. But then we're going to come down here and notice that I forgot the SSL. So I'm going to go to insert mode. Oh, oops. I'm not in insert mode apparently. So let me go to insert mode. That's better. All right, so in SSL, then server, and the same thing here. So SSL/server. Save those changes. We'll restart MariaDB. Now I'm going to connect with MySQL. And I am going to run my variables command, and there we go. So have SSL is now set to yes, which is a good thing. And I just want to show you real quick that I'm still not connected with SSL with my client, right? So my client's not connected. The server supports SSL now, but I haven't used SSL to make my connection. To do that, I have to configure my client. So just like I configured the server, I also have to configure the client. And it turns out, if you look at your config files in mariadb.conf, the client configuration is also in that directory. So you are going to use vi to edit 50-client.cnf. And we have to do the same thing in here. So I'm just going to add them right here under allow SSL. Oh, here we go. So we actually have a place to put it here. Oops, I did not mean to do that. So we're going to go to insert mode, SSL-CA is /etc /MySQL SSL. Don't want to forget it this time. ca-cert.pem. And then my client is under SSL. This one is also under SSL. And I don't think we need the SSL directive here, so I'll leave it out for now. If it doesn't work, we'll try to add it back in. So there I've got my certificate authority, my certificate and key for the client, the public key, and the private key, right? So the second one down is my public key, the third one down is my private key. And just note that that middle one, it's not just a public key, it's a public key that's an actual signed certificate. So we can validate it using the certificate authority. So we both trust the same certificate authority, and we can validate that that public key is trustworthy. I think that's all we need. So that should work. So if I exit this by writing it first, if I try to connect with MySQL, I haven't made any changes to the command, right? I just made a change to the config, and it looks like we get an error. Unable to get certificate from etc MySQL SSL. Oh, I forgot to put the full path in there. So let me go back in with VI. Right, remember that's it's under client. I made the same mistake again, right? It's under client, client-key, right? Because I tried to keep it organized. I got messed up from trying to stay organized. So now if I try to connect, all right, I'm in. And let's show our variables. We still have SSL enabled. And if I do \s, it shows me that SSL is being used. I have SSL turned on, right? So that works. So the next step is we want to, I'm going to exit all the way out of this. I want to download those files. We're going to use the scp command to download those files that we created. And I happen to have mine written down here. I think, so on my server, it's, oops, sorry. So my server is student at, and what's my IP? It's 35.232.94.108. And I put my files under etc, MySQL, and SSL, and of course client, right? But I need the ones from SSL first. So we're going to download the files under SSL. And I'm going to download them to my, and I'm just going to go copy the path because I've got them all in my project 2 folder. Oops, I got an extra quotation mark in there. So I'm just going to copy all those files under SSL into project 2. And I don't know if you can see it, but I lost my connection to the internet. So let me just connect it again. There we go. Oh, whoops. I need to put an asterisk on the end of this because I want to get all of them. All right, so I got those 2 files. I also need to get the files under client. Okay, so now I've got all my files. I've got the client files and then their certificate authority, private key. I probably, obviously I wouldn't normally give somebody the CA-key file from the server. Normally we would just give them the CA-cert and then the client cert and the client key. And that's all you need. You don't need any of the other files. And the reason I'm doing this is we're going to try to connect with the MySQL Workbench tool, right? So let's give that a try. So go ahead and open up MySQL Workbench. So you can see on my machine, I've downloaded my files, right? Here's my CA key and cert. Now remember, we don't need the key file, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that, right? All we need is CA-cert and then the client key. I don't need the request either, right? All I need is the key file, the cert file, and the CA-cert file. And I could have just given somebody the CA-cert file and let them generate their own keys if they wanted to. So theoretically, that could work as well. All right, so I've got these files here. Let's go ahead and change our connection. So everything in here remains the same, right? The only difference is I'm going to click on the SSL tab. I'm going to require SSL because I want to make sure that it uses SSL if we're going to do this. So I'm going to load the CA-cert for my CA file. Then my cert file is going to be client cert. My key file is going to be key, client-key, and that's it. I don't need anything else. We didn't put a optional password in for this, so that should be all we need. And if I hit test connection, let's see what it does. I'm going to say continue anyway. There we go. And you can see right here, it says SSL is enabled, right? So it says it right here in my connection. And if we try it, so I'm just going to double click on it. So I'm now connected to my database using TLS, and it's encrypted. If we wanted to, we could validate this. We could use something like the TCP dump utility to try to validate that it is in fact encrypted. But I'm not going to ask you to do that in this lab. Just the fact that we can see it there in the window, I think we can all agree it's probably encrypted. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.